Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Listen, I think I'm glad to see you all here. This is the process that we are undertaking starting today is a difficult process. It's a difficult process because we who come from India or Indian subcontinent and settle in a different country, we bring a living culture with us. Even though we try to integrate into new society, but our past, our traditions, our culture, our living, our conduct, our knowledge system, our literature, they are deep. They are old. They are so old, there is no history of it. We carry that with us. When I'm standing here, I am part of that civilization that developed literature, that developed language, that developed religion, that developed eating habits, that developed music, that developed human rhythm, that developed the way people can live together. But then, people don't live together. So this whole process that we think India was, or India discovered, or people discovered, definitely somewhere on the road got affected. And that's the discovery we are trying to do, to see what we are inside of us. Are human beings peaceful? Given a chance, should we all be friends? Share each other's resources, love each other, smile at each other, be happy at each other? Or do we have a colorful bias in our eyes when we see a person, why is he here? Is he competing with me? Ignore my food. Shut the door on me. I do not know. I grew up in a family who, my father was a poet. He left college when with this Indian freedom struggle when he was in undergraduate. Then India became free. I was born. Now, the home was a place of poetry, literature. People would assemble. They would think about the country, but they would also think about literature. I did not know that they were poor until I got some scholarship, and that money tried to help them around the home. This is India's story. India lives in this kind of wisecracks, fun, literary gems, but the poet may not have a food on his table. It was not all the way like that. Definitely the things were much different in the past. Otherwise, India would not produce the literature it has produced. So when we say we are trying to discover India, we are trying to see whether this whole society, which can enrich itself with arts, music, literature, dance, sculptures, philosophy, human thoughts, harmony, nature, good living, good health, good brain. So, whether did it need a foundation of wealth, a prosperity, some kind of a peace, we do not know fully well. I want to say one more thing before I introduce our moderator. My whole this discovery process, these people I talked about, these poets and so on, I did see gradually they seem to be disillusioned. They seem to think that things are not working for them. I was influenced that you must make a living for yourself. Don't be a free bird as they are. So I became a scientist, learned my trade, tried to make a living, sustain myself. Then came my children here in this country. And people asked, who are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I should have asked, can you all put down your little things and so on? I want to be serious and so on. Again, I'm not really preaching anything. I'm just trying to say my own discovery. Okay, all right. So then what happened was in 1999, there was a big cyclone in India. And that I went to do relief work in that cyclone. And when I was doing relief work, it was like interior, there are no roads, you have to go inside, sometimes boats. And you go and occasionally, so my routine was, I'll go very early. So about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll take a break. A lot of orphans in every village. So I will assemble the orphans and the people who are there, will cook some fresh food, and I'll give them. And after I feed them, I will eat some bread and so on, because we are on a health watch that we should not eat anything on the road. So one of the situations in a village, this is happening. This man who had lost 17 of his family members, and they told me he had not eaten for 21 days. And I'm giving him food. And he tells me back, have you eaten? That is where I found the humanity in India. By this 99, I'm 50-year-old by that time. So to find humanity in man is not easy. I don't know where India discovered the humanity. We each have to discover in our process whether we are initially a human. Is our humanity that champions? Or your survival trumps our humanity? Do we share or we snatch? Do we live together or do we kill? Do we occupy or we bless? Is there a plant there to give us food and we enjoy the harmony of nature? Or a plant is there for us to go and pluck food and destroy it? What is the planet we want? So this is what discovery is. We have that today. We are doing the Indus. We have some Indus people here today. Some Indus artifacts are there. Indus slides will be done. And so we made this thing called India Discovery Center. So through this process, we will try to have this path forward. Now, if people want to join us, that's the volunteer form. You can sign up. It's a very modest effort. This path is big, dense, difficult. But the only qualification we need is that you have a desire to discover yourself. Is man initially a human? Or man is there to found another man? What is it? Does India discover that yes, man can jump another man and then say, hey, look, don't jump? Or India declared, no, you are a peaceful man to start with. The rest is being taught to you. In that process, I want to recite a little poem. We also did a poets group, and our next moderator will be a poet of our friend, Sajid, who is a Bangladeshi poet. And in the celebration of poetry and so on, I have a little poem here, which is written by a friend from Concord. You know him. Ralph Emerson. So Emerson writes about Brahma. This is about 1840. Okay? And this kind of shortly summarizes what India may be, what we are after. Titled Brahma. If the red slayer think he slays, or if the slain think he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. Far or further to me is near. Shadow and sunlight are the same. The vanished gods to me appear, and one to me are same and fame. They recon ill who leave me out. When me they fly on the wings, I am the doubter and the doubt. I am the hymn the Brahmin sings. The strong gods pine for my abode, and pine in vain the sacred seven. But thou, meek lover of the good, find me and turn thy back on heaven. The question is, does heaven exist? Did India discover it? So I introduce you, my friend, Sajid, whom I've known for 30 years now, poet, comes from a distinguished background of people, freedom fighters in Bangladesh, liberty, people who fought for humanity and the women's rights. His mother was a poet. Sajid has been a teacher, an educator, has a champion of alternate energy around here. Most fundamental qualification that he brings to the table is humanity. So, celebration of humanity, I present to you Sajid Khan.
Thank you, Vijay. You're always so generous. Thank you. And I think that I could say so much more than the time permits here, so I hope that that's understood. And once again, welcome and good morning. One of the main teachings of the Upanishad, to me, is that the individual self and the universal self are one and the same. There's no contradiction. In our self-discovery of ourselves as an individual human being, we also discover all beings. What we discover is that each individual self essentially is a part and manifestation of the whole universal self. This is something that we let us emphasize more. It is the same very spirit that Plato advised, know thyself. Baul Rupchand on the streets of Bengal sang, self, first go take hold of that self. In that self, you will see the likeness of the light of 10 million moons. The seminar on Indus civilization presented by India Discovery Center is dedicated to the exploration, discovery, and rediscovery of the self, individually and collectively. That self, several thousand years later, and living in the other side of the world, that we too are part of. Discovery of India and discovery of the Indus civilization is our self-discovery as well. And within the scope of the seminar, we will do that by addressing several aspects: archaeological, historical, geographical, artistic, cultural, linguistic, literary, philosophical, religious, scientific, technological, economic, and political, which are parts of that mosaic of that civilization. We know well that each of these aspects is so vast that no one seminar or even several seminars could cover it completely. The goal here is to explore these aspects, some aspects of those aspects, to offer a comprehensive sense of the vast, fascinating, ingenious, and indeed glorious chapter of Indian history that we know as the Indus civilization. To speak on these various aspects, we have amongst us some individuals who dedicated considerable amount of their time, energy, and talent to make this seminar an exciting and educational experience for all. I'm honored and delighted to serve as the moderator. The seminar is divided into 2 sessions with a lunch break. For session 1, the speakers are Dr. Richard Meadow, Swati Dave, Srapani Bandapadhyay, and Jaspal Singh. I'll introduce them and their topics individually, preceding their lecture. Our first speaker is also our chief guest, is Dr. Richard Meadow. Dr. Richard Meadow is a senior lecturer on anthropology and director of the Zooarchaeology Laboratory of the Peabody Museum. He has been carrying out research and teaching archaeology and zooarchaeology at Harvard University since 1986. He began working at Harappa in 1987 and has served as co-director of the Harappa Archaeological Research Project since 1992. My pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Meadow.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the invitation to address you here today. I am a scholar of archaeology, which means that I have a view on archaeology which is probably different than the person who is not a scholar of archaeology. So you'll have to bear with me, and you should feel free to ask me questions at any time if I don't make it clear what I'm trying to say. I have done archaeology in South Asia. The first time I visited South Asia was in 1973, so it's been a long time. And I've always appreciated the hospitality of the individuals whom I met in South Asia, and it's been a great joy to me for most of my life. The topic for today is the Indus civilization of northwestern South Asia. And I put together some images, and some of these I will probably go through without even stopping at them. Other ones I will basically linger on to make various points. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. There we go. In this image, I'm just presenting some of the more, what might be considered more characteristic aspects of the Indus civilization. You have on the left side, you have images of 2 of the major sites of this civilization, Harappa, and on the top left, and Manjaro on the lower left. These are 2 of a number of very large settlements of the Indus civilization, which were discovered and initially excavated actually more than 100 years ago. Work continues at both sites to some degree, but especially at Harappa, where, as noted, I have been working since actually 1987. The slide in the upper center is one of the most characteristic features of the remains of the Indus civilization, and that is a seal, with a unicorn seal. The unicorn is the most commonly represented animal on these seals. And this is a particularly large seal with quite a long text in the script. You will notice something. I just want to point out something about this seal which you might not think of. And that is, if you look at the unicorn, you can see that it doesn't really look like a real animal even in the body, because the body is stretched out. It's stretched out to fit into the area needed in order to accommodate the script above it. And so you see the Indus seal makers were very cognizant of basically fitting material into a particularly confined space. The next item on the right is what's called a black slip jar. These are very large pieces of pottery. They stand about this high. They have this very particular shape, and oftentimes on the shoulder of the jar there is some Indus script which has been inscribed. These jars represent the fact of a very high technology in ceramic manufacture. They also represent something which the interaction between the Indus area in the central area along the Indus River in the Punjab and over what have you in that whole region of northwestern South Asia and far-flung areas, because these jars are also found in Arabia. And we know from analyses which have been done on them that they were actually manufactured in South Asia and were carried to Arabia, probably on boats. What they had in them, we don't know. The script on them may represent either the contents of the vessel, the owner of the vessel, the destination of the vessel. We don't know because we can't read the script. In the lower center, you have the so-called priest king, famous statue from Manjaro. It's become almost one of the few really iconic objects of the Indus civilization. The interesting thing about this is it's made of steatite, which is a soft stone, and then was fired. It was part of the Indus technology. They were able to do fantastic things like this with very soft stone. And the decoration on the clothing of the individual depicted includes these trefoil designs. There actually is no deep history of the use of such trefoil designs in the Indus civilization until the last part of that civilization. And I'll talk about that a little later because it relates to the connections that the Indus civilization had with outside areas. And on the lower right, you have the famous stone weights, which have in a particular series, and as you can see, different sizes within a standardized sort of form, although these standard units basically actually have a range of variation in them. Because in those days, of course, they didn't have the very fine ability to make things, to weigh things very precisely. So what you were comparing it with was not precise, and you wouldn't be able necessarily to make ones. But they're within narrow ranges. So that's some of the material which is most characteristic of the Indus civilization. And I will proceed now to look at the distribution of sites of that civilization. You can see them. I'm just going to quickly go through this slide. These are all different periods superimposed on one map of northwestern South Asia. One thing I would like to point out, however, is these two areas here, which are in Rajasthan area. And these two clusters of sites are two different cultures which were contemporary with the Indus but show almost no influence of the Indus civilization at all in the material record that has been recovered so far. Indicating that this group of individuals in this area on the eastern side of the Thar Desert basically lived quite independently of what was going on in the west. How independently, we really don't know. How much they interacted, we don't know, but the material record, and this is a limitation of archaeology, we depend on the material record. The material record doesn't indicate any great relationship between these two areas, even though this area in the south was a primary source of copper, and copper was very important to the Indus people.
So is that Malwa?
Beg your pardon?
Is that Malwa or is it Rajasthan?
I believe that's in Rajasthan. It's here, Jaipur here. So.
What's the next one on the lower one?
Where are you speaking?
Where the purple dots are?
This one?
Yeah. What's the
This
name of it?
This is all. I believe this is also in southern Rajasthan.
Is it Khetri? Copper mine?
Yeah, it's the Khetri in that area. Yeah. One could presume that the people who were in that area were involved in extracting copper, but there, as I say, there isn't any evidence to date in the archaeological record that they basically took up any of the Indus characteristics, which is quite different in the other areas which did take up Indus characteristics. Now this just shows quickly the distribution of the how the Indus civilization grew from a foundation of divergent areas of different cultural manifestations, and basically you have in the different periods, PowerPoint not responding. Want me to restart the program or wait for it to respond? No, it's okay.
Let's see.
So what we have here, we have the earlier period here where you have, this is in the 4th millennium BC, where you have the development of different regional cultures, which were had developed out of a substrate of hunter-gatherer populations who lived in those areas originally. And they basically started to, probably in connection with one another because there's evidence of trade between these different areas at that time, develop settled communities and used agriculture and animal husbandry in order to for subsistence purposes. In the next period, which is what's sometimes called the early Harappan period, you have basically three major groups which grew up in this same area. One is the so-called Amri group of material culture, which is characterized by a particular type of ceramic. The Codigan area, another type of ceramic, which is characteristic of this area. And the Soti Siswal region, basically, which is another set of ceramic complexes, which is characteristic. Ceramic complexes are used as indicators of different technologies, different types of ceramics being made, and different decorations on those ceramics. And they're often used as a proxy for different populations which had greater connection internally than they did externally. Now, I'm going to quickly go through these images. This is a distribution of so-called early Harappan sites. And those are the three same groups that you see there, the blue, the Amri, the green, the Codigan, and the light green being the third one. I just had a senior moment here. The Soti Siswal material. Now we go to the Harappan period itself. This is the distribution of Harappan towns and villages. You can see it covers the same arc. The material culture has what I call a veneer of similarity across this whole region. But individually in the different regions, there are distinct individual regional variants of the situation. This is something to understand. It's not a uniform situation across this whole region. Underlying what, as I say, called a veneer of Harappan artifactual styles on top, making up in many areas a very low percentage of the material which is actually recovered from these sites. You have underneath that a lot of local traditions which are continuing. And so you have a phenomenon here where you basically, some people are buying into basically a Harappan worldview or material culture for whatever reason, which we don't know why, whether this was because to make them, whether they would consider themselves elites and therefore they bought into this, or whether it was for some other reason. We really don't have a good idea of why this may have happened, and a lot of people have different theories on it. But it's important to understand that there is a lot of variability across this region, even during this period when the Harappans covered a very large area. The Harappan material culture covered a very large area. And this is the distribution of the Harappan cities, including the major ones of Manjaro, Harappa, which are the two earliest ones excavated, Ganwariwala, which is in the Cholistan desert area and is never been excavated, Rocky Gary, which is currently under excavation by Indian archaeologists, and the site of Dolavira in Kutch, basically, which was excavated in the 1990s and early 2000s by the Archaeological Survey of India. There are also maybe other sites which are basically not well known. There's one over here on the edge of in the Kutchi Plain on the edge of Balochistan, which has never been excavated. It's been visited by only 2 or 3 archaeologists, but it's a very large Harappan settlement. There's another one here and near to the Sakar Barrage, basically on the Indus, which is a site which has been excavated by the archaeologists from Kharpur, Shabda Latif University Kharpur, for some years, which is also a very large site, although heavily destroyed by commercial activity. So there are other large sites than just the ones that you hear most about, Harappa and Manjaro. Now, it's important to understand the locations of these sites and the nature of the environment in which these sites are located. Here we see Manjaro. You can see it's actually situated in the Indus River floodplain. The Indus River, as we all know, is and much less so today than in the past, flooded on a very frequent basis. And you can see the changing nature of the river courses. Here you can see the Oxbow Lakes. Here's the river going like this, but these are the old beds of the river. And this is important because probably the Indus people did not make direct use of the Indus River itself, except maybe for transportation. They made use of the water that was in the Oxbow Lakes and back swamps of the river in order to carry out agriculture and for grazing their animals in those regions. So the direct use of the Indus is for irrigation purposes is not very likely, given the very, very dangerous nature of that particular river. If we go north to, and by the way, all these images are the same scale. If we go north, and the other thing you should see here is there are a couple of other sites which are located here on the Kodiji over here to the right, and there's another site here, and one down here as well. So you see that there are very, very few sites of antiquity, which are earlier antiquity, which are located in this region. And one, keep in mind, ask yourself why that might be. Okay? We'll get back to it in a minute. Same situation at Harappa. You can see that Harappa there in the, and you can see this is the bed of the Ravi River is here. Harappa is now quite distant from the Ravi. But again, you have a similar situation of back swamps and oxbow lakes and what have you as a source of water for irrigation as necessary. And also, they're very useful for getting fishing. And so actually, there's a lot of fish bones which have been collected from Harappa. And they're all other small sites. You see a couple, 2 or 3 of them there. But again, think about, ask why there's so few sites. And I ask you to compare that with the situation at Rocky Berry area. Here you see there's masses of sites located in the same area. Okay, so one has to ask, and another area basically is the area of Cholistan, and that's this area here. Again, you can see masses of sites located in the same sort of area. And here you see different periods represented, the yellow being the Harappan, the green being the early Harappan, and the white being so-called, being an even earlier phase called the Harappan Period. So I bring this slide up here and the one that follows just to emphasize the extraordinary force of the Indus River. This is the floods of 2010, which basically created a massive, at the Sakar Barrage, broke out north of Sakar Barrage and basically flooded a huge area. And as a result, you had this situation. And actually, these sites which you see here, these villages, are actually on top of archaeological sites. And that was a main feature of living in the floodplains of the Indus and of the Punjab, and is that people lived on high ground. Where they didn't live on high ground, they basically had to move to high ground when there were floods. And if you think about the situation in those two areas, the Harappa area and Manjaro area, one reason why there are very few sites is because you had constant flooding for thousands of years in that area. Small sites were destroyed completely. Large sites remained because they were too difficult for later agriculturalists to basically move. And also remember that especially in Punjab, you had the canal colonies being built. Huge areas were leveled and many sites were destroyed. That's in contrast to the situation in Cholistan and even in the area of Haryana and Punjab in India. And that is that you have much less destruction of archaeological sites in those areas. And as a result, you get a truer picture of what the settlement may have looked like in those areas where you had the earlier destruction. It's absolutely true that there are many more archaeological sites in those areas of India than there are in the two areas of Pakistan which I showed you. The reason for that is not because that they were not heavily settled, but it's because of the nature of the river systems which they had to contend with in living in those areas. How am I doing in time? So I showed the
5 more minutes.
5 minutes, thank you. It's important as part of this to understand, of course, that, and you still see this in the region today, is the nature of the way that people grew crops and where they kept their animals. And this image basically is one which was taken from Walter Fairservice way back when he talked about this in 1967. And that is the basically traditional floodwater farming systems of the region, which still are used in Balochistan today. They're still used in Iranian Balochistan as well as in Pakistani Balochistan. They're also used in more marginal areas of the Indus system itself. And that is capturing water, flood water, as it comes from the hills, or capturing water and moving it from the back swamps and the oxbow lakes through very small irrigation channels into fields which had bunds across them to basically keep the water in them. So this small-scale agriculture was the foundation for, but with many people over a large area, was the foundation for the subsistence of the Indus civilization. Now, in other areas of these riverine areas and in other parts of the region, you also had areas in the Doabs in Punjab in the north, and in the areas which were didn't have major river systems, and then you had also a lot of grazing land which were used for particularly grazing cattle and also sheep and goat.
Okay.
And this is just an example of the similar system which exists today in the Kutchi area of Balochistan in Pakistan. This is the area of the site of Mehrgarh, which has the earliest evidence for agriculture in South Asia at the moment. It's located here. And this is basically this system of agricultural taking the water off of the Bolan River and basically through small barrages and basically redistributing it down through these field systems there. And similar sort of thing can take place in oxbow lakes and back swamps and what have you in the main river areas itself.
So how far is this from the pass?
Beg your pardon?
How far is this from the Bolan Pass?
Okay, so the Bolan Pass is right here. And it comes down and basically, this is, Mehrgarh is here, that's actually below the Bolan Pass, so the pass itself starts right up in here.
What is the scale?
That's a good question. Basically, this is about 1 kilometer here, okay?
So going through the pass is as easy as going downstream.
Beg your pardon?
So going through the pass would be almost as easy as going downstream.
The pass was a major communication route, basically, up into the highlands. And as well as the source of, and actually there was perennial water available in the Bolan Pass. So it's one of the largest, it's the largest one, basically river system in this particular area. And as a result was heavily utilized in the past, and as it is still today. Now looking quickly at the chronology of Harappa itself, and this serves as sort of a proxy for the Indus civilization as a whole. You have something which is called the early Harappan. Now the early Harappan is a term which you'll see much in the literature and talked about in newspapers and what have you. And it's basically can be any, people use it from anywhere from 8,000 BC to however far back you want to go with it. But archaeologically speaking, the early Harappan really starts in the 4th millennium, basically. It basically is the beginning of a trend toward the development of first the regional styles of material culture, which then coalesced in the later portion of the early Harappan in the so-called Kokiji phase. This is a Harappa, this is a term in Harappa, don't forget, this is not overall. Into basically something which is becomes the mature or urban Harappan, dating from 2600 to about 1900 BC. And then you have the late Harappan period after that, which continues from about 1900 into past 1500 BC. These dates come from radiocarbon, which is a method which has been used since the early 1950s to date sites. And I want to emphasize the fact that radiocarbon is a scientific technique, but the samples from which are given to the labs for radiocarbon purposes are basically archaeological remains, which are completely dependent on their integrity and for their understanding on the nature of the context from which they came, and also from the depositional and bioturbation incidents which took place in their deposition. So you can have carbon which is deposited in a site, either charcoal or other sorts of material which can be dated. But once it gets into the site at a particular period of time, it can be basically moved around. It can be moved around by rodents. It can be moved around by people digging pits into the site and throwing up the dirt, so they can take earlier material and throw it up later. Or it can also, if it's a piece that are small enough, they can actually make their way down into the ground through time. And so one of the most important things an archaeologist has to do in using these dates is try to figure out what dates make sense. And actually you have to use archaeological information in order to understand that. While the date is dating something, it's dating the individual item which is being dated, you have to figure out what that something actually, whether it's in its an original resting position, or it's been moved around, or something else has happened. So there's a lot of judgment that goes into this. You just because you see an early radiocarbon date doesn't mean that it actually dates what it's supposed to, what people say it's dated. You have to actually make draw a conclusion based on archaeological evidence. And this is clearly shown if you look at some of these dates on this image here. You'll see that there is actually very little consistency in the dates here. So for example, here's a date which basically ranges between 3900 and 3600. By the way, dates are probabilities, and they basically are given in ranges. So that's almost from 4000 to 3600, with maybe in the middle about 3700. Here's another one, similar one right here. These are basically from these areas here. But here's one here, which is in the same hearth. Here's a date of basically between 2900 and 2600. Okay, you're dealing with a period of 1,000 years later, coming in the same location as something which is dated 1,000 years earlier. Okay, that just gives you a really good idea of the difficulties that we face in dealing with radiocarbon dates. So take radiocarbon, you need to take, and the problem is you need lots of dates in order to get an idea of what's going on. And unfortunately, most sites in northwestern South Asia are very, very poorly dated. There may be a maximum of 4 or 5 or 6 dates, which is not enough to figure out messes like this, basically. Okay, so that's an important point I want to make to you, is just be critical of the way people use radiocarbon.
So based on your this assessment, so how do you date?
Okay.
How do you speculate?
So first of all, you have to figure out why is this happening, okay? In fact, what you see here, a lot of stuff here, these are all rodent holes, okay? The rodents had a field day in this area. This is what it said, okay? They just went through there and disturbed everything. And as a result, we can be pretty sure that you're dealing with a lot of bioturbation through rodent use and also through insect activity and what have you. This is an ashy deposit, okay? Soft, it was not very hard, what have you. So even though we chose hearths, which we thought were really, really solid, they were really good context, you can see what happens even in them. So you have to figure out, what are you looking at? I mean, every date dates something, okay? So what do we look at? We sort of think that this probably, this dates of 3900, about 3700 might be pretty decent for the earliest time period of this, but it's not proved. I mean, we have a different area of the site close by this, and it's confirmed by that sort of situation. So you dig different areas, and you basically see what works and what doesn't work. So it's a matter of judgment. It's not science, it's judgment.
Could you please comment on recent studies?
We have a Q&A at the end.
Okay. Sorry.
Hold it, yeah.
Okay. So I'll just end basically with a summary statement here that the Indus civilization itself can be conceptualized as a cultural phenomenon of 500 to 700 years, varying in expression across time and space. Okay? The dates are about 2600 to 1900 BC. Most of what we know about the Indus civilization, with certain exceptions, comes from the last 300 years of that period. So most of the stuff from Manjaro and most of the stuff that's published from Harappa up until our excavation basically dealt with the last part of the Indus period. And there was a long period of time before that in the development which is not well represented at most sites that have been excavated. This is because you have this huge amount of stuff in the later period overlying the stuff on the earlier period, so you can't dig as much of the earlier period. Okay? So, but that's important to understand, because the Indus civilization was not static, it changed through time. And we're only now beginning to understand how this might have changed. And interestingly, there's a lot of sites which are distant from the core area. There are sites in western Baluchistan along the Makran coast of the Indian Ocean. You have the site of Shortagai up on the Amudarya River, basically in northern Afghanistan, which is a very good Indus site. It's got almost all the material in Indus. These are almost like colonies, okay, in these areas. But these, interestingly enough, few radiocarbon dates we have from these indicate that these actually belong to the earlier part of the Indus, not the later part of the Indus. So something was going on about basically creating this web of sites very distant from the core earlier, and wasn't in the later period. At the same time, the largest areas which are covered by settlements of the Indus period actually belong to the latest period, in the major settlements. So Harappa is biggest in the latest period, Manjaro is biggest in the latest period. Okay? So you've got a dynamic going on here which we really don't understand yet. But it's one which makes it, it's a very vibrant, actually it was a very vibrant situation and changing situation in the Indus area. So there's really no good way to characterize the Indus civilization as a whole over the whole period of 700 years which it existed. We're now only beginning to see how this changed through time.
Question?
Yep.
Wait. I think, wait, is it delayed now? I think you
Okay,
finish
sorry.
up. Finish up.
Okay,
We have
I'm
time for
finished.
question at the end.
I'm finished.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm kind of stopping the questions because we have a special Q&A period. We have specially kept that. And when the people will be presenting, please don't, I think there were 20 minutes and we have 5 minutes Q&A after the talk. So hold your questions, don't interrupt. And then after the talk, have your questions. Then after 5 minutes each and so on, at 3:30 or so, we'll have a general Q&A where you can really discuss, because we have to understand it. Understand in the sense when you have a question, other person might also understand that. So that we can do when you have a total understanding of it. And then you have a question, and let the question be fully explained. All right, so we'll give enough time then. So now, I again bring back Sajid. Thank you again.